After 3 years of marriage, Shawn fell in love with a college girl and their affair was intense. Meanwhile, I continued to play the role of a gentle and understanding wealthy wife, even tactfully covering for him in front of our parents. But things took a turn when Shawn found me at the club sitting on a male model's lap, kissing him passionately. Enraged, Shawn ended up causing a scene at the club. The woman Shawn was seeing on the side recently became a bit restless. She even sneaked into the mansion behind Shawn's back, seeking recognition from the grandfather. Grandfather was furious. I cooperated with Shawn to stage a play and safely escorted the woman out of the situation. As we stepped out of the mansion's grand gate, the girl, with tears in her eyes, reached out and grabbed Shawn's sleeve. "Shawn, I'm not with you for money." Moved, Shawn comforted her gently, understanding why he was so captivated by her. The attitudes of the grandfather and Shawn's parents made her realize the vast gap between her and Shawn's family, prompting her to explain so eagerly. Shawn furrowed his brow slightly, unable to blame her. He reached out and patted her head, half helplessly and half indulgently, saying, "Stop crying, I understand." Then he looked at me, somewhat hesitant. "She might still be scared, I'll take her home first." "What about you?" Since I had come in Shawn's car, I couldn't go back in it with him now that he was taking his new love. I smiled and took the initiative. "I'll just call a cab later." Shawn seemed quite pleased with my maturity. He nodded, took the girl in his arms, and walked away without looking back. He didn't even remember that around the mansion for miles, the land was prime real estate, inhabited by the rich and powerful, making it impossible to hail a cab. Shawn didn't come home until the next evening, with a few dark strawberry marks on his neck. Clearly, he strategically placed them where his collar couldn't hide them, as if asserting ownership. Such childish tricks were something only a shallow-minded person would do. I lowered my eyes, pretending not to notice, and graciously took his coat as a devoted and virtuous wife would. I even showed concern for his lover. "How is she?" Shawn loosened his collar and casually said, throwing a tantrum, "She'll be fine after I calm her down." After some hesitation, I decided to share my long-considered thoughts with him. "Have you ever thought about giving her a proper status?" Shawn stood still in disbelief. After a moment, he finally reacted, asking puzzled, "What do you mean?" "What I mean is, Shawn, let's get divorced. I don't want to continue this charade of being a devoted wife." Clearly, Shawn had never considered that I would bring up divorce. He raised his hand to rub his forehead, his once charming face now full of agitation. "Stella, you must know that divorce is not that simple for us." I can hear him trying to stay calm and composed in his tone. In the past, this attitude of his meant he didn't want to discuss the topic further, and I should back off. But this time, I was determined to seek a divorce. Shawn and I had a marriage of convenience. Divorce would not only involve us but also our families, making it a complicated matter. I bit my lip and continued, "It might be troublesome, but..." "Enough." He rudely cut me off, pulled me into his arms, and said, "I have neglected you lately, I'll change. Don't bring up divorce again." "Stella, it seems like we haven't." He lowered his head, his slightly pouted lips getting closer to mine. I quickly covered his mouth with my hand, making up an excuse, "I'm on my period." Not convenient. With the divorce discussion failed, I quickly packed my bags and moved out of the house. Shawn thought I was jealous and throwing a tantrum, so he called me multiple times and bombarded me with messages. In truth, I was just worried about him getting entangled with others. As for jealousy, I admit that when we first got married, any hint of scandal about him would really upset me. But after numerous instances, I gradually got used to it. My overflowing love for him faded away through repeated habits. However, I didn't mind letting him misunderstand. It gave me a chance to use his credit cards freely, a form of compensation for his betrayal of our marriage. A week after leaving home, my best friend Coco and I entered the most high-end leisure club, with all expenses covered by Shawn. As soon as we entered, we bumped into the woman in a work uniform carrying a fruit platter. "You?" I cleared my throat and asked, "What are you doing here?" She pursed her lips, glaring at me with her beautiful eyes, looking resentful. Coco held my hand, studied her up and down, and said, "Is this the little plaything Shawn keeps on the side?" Why is she here working if Shawn doesn't give her money? Did he make her come here to work? The woman's tray trembled slightly as if she were an angry cat. Shawn and I are together because we love each other, not for his money. Pointing the blame at me, she continued, Shawn told me he only loves me. He's only with you for the family's benefits. I waved my hand dismissively. Got it. Wish you two happiness. Ignoring her, I walked into the private room with Coco. Coco chuckled mischievously. Where did Shawn find this beauty? She's actually having a romance with a married man of Shawn's status. Does she think she can succeed with her background? She might as well make the most of it while she's young. I smirked. That's why they say youth is valuable. For people like us, the old money, we value legacy more than wealth, so we are particularly cautious about marriage. Either the marriage has exceptional conditions with high social status, or it's a union of families. Shawn wasn't silly enough to give up everything he had for her, nor did he agree to the divorce I suggested. Coco added, I heard that girl has been causing a stir with Shawn these days. Seems like she's not happy that you took away most of Shawn's attention when you left home. The circle is so small, if one digs for information, it's hard to keep secrets. I gave her a look. You're quite nosy. Gotta admit, using the money from the cheating husband to support a male model is really satisfying. Especially when the male model has good looks, sweet talk, and a great body. It would be even better if you don't get caught by your husband. When Shawn kicked the door open, I was straddling the male model I had been eyeing for the past 2 days, hugging his neck and kissing his face. I was dressed up seductively with glamorous makeup, big waves of hair, and a revealing hot outfit. Upon hearing the noise, I instinctively looked towards the source before the flirtatious expression could fade from my eyes. I saw Shawn's face full of hostility. I pecked the male model's lips again before reluctantly getting off him. Shawn's face had turned as dark as the bottom of a pot, and the look he gave the male model was so fierce as if he wanted to tear him apart. I ran my fingers through my hair and broke the silence first. What brings you here? Through gritted teeth, he spoke slowly and deeply. Stella, how dare you? What's there to not dare? You do your thing, I'll do mine. The more I spoke, the more guilty I felt. Being fair is important. I didn't make a fuss even when you kept a mistress outside. Not because I felt guilty for getting caught with a male escort, but simply because I was cheating on him with his own money. Shawn, why are you here? I've been looking for you in the VIP lounge. Linda, I've brought her to you. I'm really sorry, I didn't know she was yours. I glanced sideways and saw a chubby man leading a girl towards us. So, her name is Linda. Shawn stood still, not even looking in Linda's direction. On the other hand, Linda, like a loving swallow returning to the woods, threw herself into his arms, sobbing, Honey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have acted out with you, and I shouldn't have secretly come out to work. After speaking, she saw me as her eyes followed Shawn's gaze. She pursed her lips, shrunk into Shawn's arms, and then softly called out, Honey. A mistress openly calling me husband in front of his wife. Isn't that a blatant provocation? I didn't care, just found it a bit disgusting. The chubby man who had already approached us seemed to be the one suffering the most. Even though I didn't know him, he seemed to recognize me. He looked at me, then at the visibly messed up male model by my side, and finally at Shawn and his mistress in his arms, who were both looking serious. In just a minute, his facial expressions changed more than 10 times. In families with business alliances, it's normal for the spouses to do their own things as long as it doesn't get too out of hand. They will choose not to interfere for the sake of benefits, painting a false picture of peace. Shamelessly, Linda clung to Shawn's back. He tried to pacify her temper. Let the driver send you back first, I need to take care of something here. Speaking in a soft voice, Linda agreed and slowly stepped back from Shawn's embrace. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment. Then she casually said, Are you dealing with Stella's matter? When I started working here a few days ago, I met Stella and her friend, and heard that they ordered the 5 most expensive items that day. I was afraid of causing a fight between you, so I didn't dare to tell you. Girls can be so unkind. I clicked my tongue. Shawn clenched his fist by his side, his gaze shifted to Linda, annoyance building up. I told you to go back first, don't you understand? Maybe not used to being treated this way, Linda pouted and glared at him, tears on the edge of falling, looking like a child waiting to be comforted. However, Shawn was not in the mood to play childish emotional games right now. For the first time, he lost his temper with the woman he had once cherished. "Get out." Linda ran off in tears. Shawn, with a stern face, walked to the sofa where I had just been with the male model and sat down heavily. "Bring me everything my wife has ordered." He gritted his teeth, avoiding saying the words "male model." The manager wiped his sweat, nodded in agreement with a bow. As soon as he left, Shawn slammed the crystal glass on the table. "You're quite something, Stella." He took off his suit jacket and threw it to me. The oversized clothing covered my head. I could still faintly smell the perfume Linda had left on it. I pulled it down, intending to return it to him, but he frowned, scanned me up and down, and finally his gaze settled on the two long white legs under the miniskirt. "Put it on. Don't ever go out dressed like this again." I hadn't realized how possessive he was. I calmly put the clothes away and looked directly into his eyes. "Shawn, let's get a divorce. I'm truly fed up." Shawn, who had been restraining himself, exploded emotionally after I finished that sentence. His eyes were red, and he kicked the table in front of him. "Have I not said, never mention those two words again?" I sighed, trying to communicate with him calmly. "You don't love me, so why force yourself to be with me? None of us is happy this way." Shawn was stunned for a moment, then pointed to the male model who had been standing quietly beside him, his voice rough as if it had been rubbed with sandpaper. "Not happy? You're happy hanging around with this unrefined scum?" The male model raised an eyebrow and retorted, "Are you not clear about whether she's happy or not? Just think about when you're hanging around with that unrefined scum you're keeping." I quietly gave him a thumbs up. He was a warrior. When Coco led a row of male models in, Shawn had already turned the private room into a mess. The chubby man's face trembled, and carefully looked at the warrior standing in the ruins. "Shawn, what's this?" Shawn threw the cigarette in his hand to the ground, stomped on it a couple of times, and said in a nonchalant tone, "We'll calculate the losses later, report it to our company's finance." With a faint smirk, he glanced over the dozens of good-looking male models. "I didn't know you had such a big appetite." I rolled my eyes silently in my heart as Shawn pulled out a bank card and threw it on the deformed table. "There's 5 million in there, all of you. Take turns slapping each other. Whoever slaps the loudest gets this money," he said. I glared at him angrily. "Shawn, are you out of your mind? You're humiliating people." Just as I finished shouting, there was a series of crisp sounds behind me. Shawn's mocking expression deepened. "Looks like they're happy to be humiliated by me." I stiffly turned around to see that the people the manager had brought were already fighting, except for the warrior who had stood up to Shawn earlier, still standing rebelliously to the side. He really lived up to my expectations so far. Shawn, uninterested in watching their performance, grabbed my arm to take me away but was stopped by the warrior who was watching the scene. Squinting, Shawn said to him, "Know your place. You're nothing but a lowly thing for people's entertainment. Get lost." I furrowed my brows in dissatisfaction and said, "Shawn, can't you speak more nicely?" Unexpectedly, I was standing up for someone, and Shawn's grip on my arm tightened. "You better shut up and come back with me obediently, otherwise, I can't guarantee what I'll do later." The handsome face of the warrior darkened, indicating a storm was brewing. Afraid they would start fighting, I quickly shook my head at him. After all, I was still Shawn's legal wife for now, and given Shawn's social status, dealing with a small male model would be a piece of cake. I didn't want to cause trouble for anybody. As we left the club, Shawn flagged down a car, tossed me into the back seat, and followed suit. Silence filled the air. Back home, he immediately locked the door, took out his phone and made a call. "Bring more people and smash up that club for me. Inside, there's a guy called." He looked at me, and I quickly shook my head. It's not that I didn't want to tell him the warrior's name, but I truly didn't know. I was just there to have a good time. Why did I need to know the guy's name? Go find the manager, he knows who it is. Smash the place, then find that kid and cripple his hand. Shawn had a bit of a temper issue, which I knew. But he had exceptional self-control, so I rarely saw him lose his temper. I never imagined he could be this ruthless. He's innocent, Shawn, you can't do this. He stood up and pressed me down, his beautiful eyes filled with twisted blood vessels. He dares to have his eyes on you, so he's not innocent. Stella, be a good girl, don't plead for him with me. Otherwise, what I want may not just be one of his hands. Eventually, someone innocent got involved because of me. Trying to push him off, he grabbed me and pressed me against the headboard. Has he touched you? He whispered in my ear. I kicked him with my legs, but he pinned them down. I glared back, no. They don't offer that service. They can tease and flirt, but never go all the way, which is quite tantalizing. Clearly understanding, he chuckled and his face softened. You're cute when you're pouting holding my hands. He used one hand to pinch my cheeks. These past few days have been ridiculous. Let's put this aside and move forward, okay? Seems like he's trying to sweet-talk me. Fine, I'll let you off the hook if you break up with that college student. Shawn fell silent for a few seconds, then let go of me and sat up straight. Irritated, he scratched his head. You know, she can't threaten your position. If you really don't like her, I won't have her appear in front of you again. In other words, he was unwilling to break up. I nodded, indicating my understanding. Thankfully, I hadn't liked him for a long time, otherwise, my heart would be aching right now. Shawn and I had a marriage of convenience but also childhood sweethearts. I had secretly loved him for many years. We had a honeymoon period for over a year after marriage. Until one time, he was caught on camera entering a hotel with a certain female celebrity while inebriated. I cried returning home. My mom sat quietly beside me, waiting for me to finish crying before handing me a stack of tissues. Stella, marital bliss is a luxury for our kind of family. While I hope you two are deeply in love and committed to each other, the situation has come to this. You should learn to accept it sooner. Thinking he had made me feel better, Shawn tried to touch my hair but I dodged him. Stella, stop being stubborn. You've always been sensible, haven't you? Initially, I was sensible because of my fondness for him, but later it was due to not caring much. My personality was never that gentle to begin with. But our family needed a well-read, dignified young lady, and Shawn's family required a well-mannered, gentle and prudent daughter-in-law. Pretending for over 20 years had been exhausting. Looking up at him, ready to bring up divorce again, Shawn's phone rang. Perhaps to spite me, he answered on speakerphone. Shawn, the club has been smashed, as you instructed to cripple the hand. It might be a bit tricky. It's the one who just returned, the Smiths, I think. He's one of the club's top bosses. The grandson of the Smiths? His name seemed to be Ken. No wonder I had run into him near the villa last time. It's not that the car is bad, but the villa is the top rich area in Jincheng, and the vehicles are basically starting at tens of millions. Later, when I saw him at the club, I naturally thought he was the guest of some rich woman. Now thinking back, that day he should have just come out from the Smith's house. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, his identity is not simple, so Shawn couldn't easily mess with him. The guilt in my heart lightened a lot. Shawn thought that smashing a club was simply a matter of compensation. He has the money, a lot of it. And he has the status as the old money heir. No one would not give him face. But, exactly, the boss behind the club is another future heir who just had a falling out with him. However, within a few hours, the news of the group general manager smashing a high-end club in anger for a mistress quickly made headlines. The news even came with surveillance footage of Linda in her work uniform, throwing herself into Shawn's arms and calling him husband. Ken personally forwarded the video. Before this, we had no knowledge that Linda was Shawn's girlfriend, and there was no disrespect shown towards Linda. Regarding the incident of sending someone to smash the shop, we hope Shawn can give a reasonable explanation. Shawn is married, which is not a secret. And since Linda dared to go to his grandfather demanding a position, she naturally wouldn't have a low-key personality. Her real information and social media accounts were soon dug up. Her past displays of affection all turned into spears pointed at her. Although the hot search was quickly taken down, too many people had seen it, and it eventually turned into a big scene. We were called back to the villa once again. Grandpa sat in a chair with a cane, shaking with anger. Shawn's father stood beside him, patting Grandpa's back to calm him down. When he saw Shawn, he immediately turned cold. "You ungrateful child, why aren't you kneeling down?" Knowing his fault, Shawn pursed his lips, didn't say a word, and then plopped down on his knees in front of Grandpa. "Didn't you say last time that girl was just a bartender? Did she throw herself at Shawn because he has money? How come she has become his mistress now? And that girl from the Smiths, every time we come back, his grandfather needs to stay in the hospital for a few days? She's nothing but trouble. Why did you go smash his shop? All for that thing." Grandpa would say a sentence and then tap Shawn on the body with his cane. "That's not it. Grandpa, I smashed his shop because..." Shawn stopped mid-sentence, abruptly shutting his mouth. He kept his head high, now lowered. Grandpa tapped him on his body a couple more times until he couldn't get any words out of him, then shifted his gaze to me. "Stella, tell Grandpa what really happened." I glanced at Shawn, who was staring at the ground and saying nothing, and followed his lead, lowering my head like an ostrich with a clamshell on my mouth. How could I say this? Should I say it all started with your grandson catching me red-handed when I was with a male model? As Grandpa scolded, Shawn's phone kept ringing. I guessed it might be Linda. With her real information exposed, her days must be tough. As soon as he left the old mansion, he immediately called back. Although his voice was still strained, a hint of tenderness could be heard. "Don't be afraid, I'm coming to see you now. Stop crying and wait for me." Luckily, I learned my lesson and drove here myself this time, or I would be left behind again. Linda is emotionally unstable now. I need to go see her first. Shawn looked at me, wanting to say something. I nodded and said calmly, "You go." I have no ill will towards the girl, except for showing off how good Shawn is to her. She hasn't actually harmed me. The main responsibility for the affair lies with Shawn. Instead of heading home directly, I drove to the company. Most of the family's businesses have been managed by my brother in recent years. He knew about my decision to divorce and asked, "Have you made up your mind?" Even setting aside the issue of property division when you divorce, it also involves cooperation between the two families. The education I received since childhood is that family interests outweigh personal interests. The old money, like a sturdy ancient tree, has not only a main trunk but also extended branches. They are constantly watching us, always wanting to take over. But a lifetime is so long. I nodded. "Brother, I'm sorry." My brother was silent for a moment, patted my head, and said gently, "If you want to leave, then leave. Our family does not rely on a daughter's marriage to maintain." Due to the shop-smashing incident, Shawn's family's stocks had fallen a bit, and Linda was causing a lot of trouble. Shawn didn't return home until a few days later. I pushed the divorce agreement in front of him. "Take a look. If there are no issues, sign it." Shawn picked it up and threw it in the trash. "Stella, can you not argue with me right now? I'm tired, let me rest for a bit." He tried to hug me while saying this. I pushed him away and said calmly, "In all these years of marriage, when have I ever argued with you? If you sign it, we'll part amicably. If you don't sign, then we'll go through legal proceedings." Shawn looked at me intensely, probably sensing my firm attitude, and panicked. "Do we have to be so decisive? Stella, I don't want to divorce you. Can't we not get a divorce? I cut ties with her as you requested, and you promised we would live well once I cut those ties." He shook my head. "It's too late." To avoid the divorce, Shawn moved directly into the company. But every day he would send me good morning and good night messages, share daily life updates, and offer gifts as if they were free. Perhaps he was using the same tactics he used on Linda on me. When he shared the coffee he had drunk today with me again, I couldn't help but reply, "Shawn, are you not tired of this? You don't love me, so why bother?" The message was sent successfully, and the chat box finally fell silent. These days, even though I never replied to him, he would still talk to himself. Early the next morning, Shawn hesitantly sent me a good morning message. "I thought all night and realized that I do love you. Stella, I'm sorry. Can you give me one more chance?" It seemed like Shawn had finally come to his senses. He even openly confessed his feelings for me on the company's official account. This move quickly drew a barrage of criticism from netizens. Stop pretending, it's disgusting to watch. Did the incident of smashing the shop for a mistress affect the company's revenue? So now you're trying to save face. He took all the blame for the cursing. Then he posted a very sincere apology. He admitted his mistake, acknowledging he realized it too late, accepting criticism and supervision from everyone. He just wanted to save his marriage and his beloved. I felt like I was watching a farce. I asked for the best lawyer from my brother, ready to sue for divorce. The next day, Linda asked to meet at a cafe. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, barely able to open. Her once lively face looked dull, her lips dry and peeling, even her voice hoarse. Can you please give Shawn back to me? I really like him, please, I'm begging you. Although I felt sorry for her appearance, it was none of my business. A mistress asking the legal wife to give her husband back? You shouldn't have come to me. Tears started to flow as she blinked her eyes. I have no choice. He broke up with me, and when I went to see him, he refused to meet me. Please, help me. I can't be without him. I stood up, looking down at her. Sorry, I can't help you. We are getting a divorce. Seeing the spark in her swollen eyes faded instantly, I raised my lips slightly, turned and left. The girl was still living in a dream. I wish her luck. When I got home, I unexpectedly saw Shawn in the living room. Raising my eyebrows, I asked, "What, back to divorce me?" He seemed uneasy. No, the assistant said there's a popular movie lately, so he already bought tickets for us. Are you trying to go on a date with me? No need, the only thing we can discuss right now is the divorce. I've already contacted a lawyer. If you still don't sign, we'll see each other in court in a couple of days. Shawn sat in the shadows, his expression unreadable. After a while, he asked, "Is divorce the only option?" Yes. Then, give me one more month. I remember we haven't had our honeymoon. I felt like my eyebrows were twisting into pretzels. Is that necessary? He was firm. Yes. A month later, I signed voluntarily. Even if we proceed through the legal process, it should still take a few years if I disagree, right? It seemed like the best solution so far. Seeing me hesitant, he continued, I can compromise on the property division, but for this month, we need to live like a normal couple. As he spoke, there was a hint of bitterness in his voice. Let's consider this our belated honeymoon. He made a significant compromise. In addition to the property division I had suggested, he gave me 2 office buildings, 3 stores, and even 5% of company's shares. Considering he only held 20% himself. With the property division settled, Shawn began planning the outings for the month. Excited like a naive young man in love, he asked me, "Stella, shall we go to an amusement park? Or to the beach?" I sat casually on the sofa, poking at a casual game on my phone, and said indifferently, "Don't you need to work? Everything is arranged, and the assistant will contact me if there's an emergency. This is my strategy. Take a look at where you want to go." He handed me a paper filled with words, looking at me with bright eyes, a mix of excitement and nervousness. 2 people on the brink of divorce, pretending to have a pure love affair for a month. Knowing that as long as I endured for a month, I could smoothly get divorced and receive a handsome sum, I quietly endured. I casually pointed, "Let's go to this one." I was referring to the largest shopping mall. Shawn had bought a set of couple outfits at some point, blushing as he asked me to change into them. I repeated to myself 10 times, divorce, property, and endured it again. We had a so-called couple hot pot dinner and went to catch dolls. I was holding a bunch of stuffed animals about to move to the next room to play an escape game when I bumped into a broad chest. "Watch it." I looked up and met Ken's eyes. Realizing his identity and recalling how I sat on his lap and nibbled on his ear before, it was inevitably awkward. Shawn quickly pulled me out from Ken's embrace and hid me behind him. Even without looking, I could sense the tension between the two. Ken spoke first, with a hint of sarcasm. "Shawn is really something, got 2 catches at home and outside." With a stiff back, Shawn replied in a somewhat sharp tone, Ken is indeed interesting, as long as family matters are not neglected. Seems like Ken forgot what I had said, things that don't belong to him, don't bother thinking about it. Is that so? Ken laughed lightly. Until the end, who gets what isn't certain? Isn't that right, Shawn? Before showing appreciation for Shawn's generosity, I was thinking of redecorating the club lately, but was troubled by the costs. Shawn came forward to offer money. Because of Ken, Shawn lost interest in continuing to play. We decided to return home early. That Ken guy is definitely not a good person. Stella, keep your distance from him in the future. Indeed, today's Ken exuded two completely different temperaments. Though I silently agreed with him, I didn't want to respond. Shawn sneaked a glance at me, changed the subject. How about going to Provence in a few days, or the Maldives? For these 2 days, he has been talking to me cautiously, as if trying to please me and not make me angry. I just said casually, whatever. It's just 1 month, endure and it will pass. In the end, we didn't make it to Provence or the Maldives because Stella was pregnant. She posted a photo of the pregnancy test report with a caption, "Baby, Daddy doesn't want us. But it's okay, you still have Mommy, Mommy will take good care of you." This news hit Shawn like a bomb, breaking him into pieces. Both his official corporate account and personal account were flooded with insults. Isn't love supposed to be passionate and make you willing to do anything? How come you're kicking her out just because she's pregnant? Divorce seemed no longer about just the two of us. The company's stock price quickly dropped, losing $1.2 billion in one night. Surprisingly, probably out of pity for me, they started buying products from our family's company in a buying spree. Even in their official messages advising rational consumption, they hinted at remarriage, but the remarriage was actually a divorce. Whether or not it's rational doesn't matter, just let the beautiful lady get a divorce, we'll still continue buying. He couldn't wait for a month and signed the divorce agreement. Stella, after I sort all this out, can I still pursue you? I rejected without hesitation. Let's maintain some dignity for each other. He turned away, a tear rolling down from his eye. After the divorce, I packed my bags and left the country to travel the world. My brother drove me to the airport. Before passing through security, he patted my shoulder and said, "Stella, I hope you can be yourself and not be confined anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes as I choked out, "Okay." I traveled through different countries. I got tanned but was happy. I could run wild, laugh out loud, lie in bed eating chips and binge-watching shows, or head to a roadside stall in slippers with messy hair, enjoying street food now. I wasn't the obedient daughter of a rich family before, nor was I Shawn's caring wife. I was just Stella. Freedom is truly great. I saw Shawn many times, strolling around London streets or on a boat in Venice, watching me from a distance. As long as he didn't disturb me, I let him be. I heard he wasn't doing well. Due to Linda's issue, even Grandpa and other respected elders in the family were disappointed in him. Some suggested selecting a replacement for him. Shawn didn't say anything, he just buried himself in cleaning up the mess. Family lineage was crucial. Even if an outside child was conceived, it would still be taken care of. Maybe they'd need it in the future. However, Linda couldn't hold on to the child. At 16 weeks pregnant, Shawn took her for amniocentesis. If it was his, it would be terminated. If not, it would be no concern of his. Fortunately, the child wasn't his. Later, Shawn stepped down from the power center. He said, "I want to walk the path she once walked." Let him go, as none of it concerned me anymore. When I met Ken, I was watching the sunset on the coast of Scotland. He came up to me and casually sat beside me, asking, "Stella, do you want to give it a try with me?" I tilted my head and replied, "Try what? Marriage? I think I'll pass. I'm beautiful and rich, I can live well alone. Why should I trap myself in the cage of marriage again?" He pondered and said, "You can use my money to feed male models." That was an open-minded suggestion. Smiling mischievously, I said, "No need. The properties from the divorce settlement will last me a lifetime." Shawn and Ken, both selected as heirs from their families, each with their own virtues. After all, marriage wasn't a necessity. Who's to say that being alone and free can't lead to happiness? The setting sun turned the sky crimson, reflecting on the rippling sea. The sea breeze caressed my face. Everything was the best choice. Shawn's epilogue. After divorcing Stella, I spent nights sleepless, her figure filling my thoughts when I closed my eyes. I wanted to see her, even if just for a glance. But it wasn't possible for now. The company faced a significant impact due to me, and shareholders all had grievances. The elders at home were eager to push me out. If I were to leave, it would be by my own choice, not their dismissal. Also, Linda. What was it that made me like her back then? Maybe it was how she stood at the school gate with books in hand, in a white dress swaying in the wind, pure yet beautiful. It was nothing like Stella back then. Stella too adored white dresses, gentle and kind. I drove to the small apartment I bought for Linda. Seeing the familiar setting, memories of the crazy things we did there made me feel filthy. How could someone as dirty as me deserve to have Stella back by my side? Linda approached me with joy, her hand on her still flat stomach, beaming. Are you here to see me and the baby? My gaze lingered on her stomach. While it's still early in the pregnancy, you should abort it. The smile on her face faded, eyes widened in disbelief as she said, what are you talking about? This is your child. My child, only Stella is qualified to bear. Though, she can no longer bear a child for me. However, her words did make me wonder. Is the child really mine? Now, decide whether to abort it or wait a few months for an amniocentesis. It's your choice. The child seemed to have become Linda's weapon for climbing up the hierarchy. Once again, she secretly went to the old house without my knowledge. She seemed to know the importance of offspring in a family like ours, and Stella and I had been married for 3 years with no offspring. Grandfather, though dissatisfied, intervened to keep the child. So, let's wait a few months. At 16 weeks, we'll do a DNA test. If it's mine, I have ways to get rid of it. I know I'm heartless, but what else can I do? If she bore my child, Stella and I would truly have no chance. Insomnia became more severe. Closing my eyes, all I could see were images of Stella. Her gentle smile, her scolding for me throwing clothes around, and sitting quietly by the window reading a book. I went to see a psychiatrist. After hearing my story, the doctor told me that a troubled heart needs proper treatment. But my remedy is far across the ocean. She refused to see me, let alone save me. The wait was agonizing. As soon as the time was right, I took Linda to have an amniocentesis. The child wasn't mine. I cried uncontrollably. Stella, my Stella. I had fought so hard for a month, hoping to move her with my efforts during that time. Even if she still chose to divorce in the end, at least we would have a month of sweet memories. But because of this child that was never mine. It's all Linda's fault. I held the report in my hand, and stormed into the small apartment. I grabbed her by the neck, demanding to know why she had caused me to lose my Stella. Linda struggled, hitting my arms and said intermittently, it wasn't you, you approached me first, right? Shawn, no one forced you to cheat. The grip on my hand loosened. No one forced me to cheat. I spent 6 months settling the company's affairs. After everyone had regained their trust in me, I voluntarily resigned. Lovesickness is too bitter. I wanted to find her, even if it was just to accompany her from afar, even if she would no longer accept me. As long as I could see her, I'd be content. Ken's epilogue. I met Stella when I was 5 years old. In order for me to receive the best education, my mother coldly sent me back to the Smiths. That was the first time I entered the Smiths and the first time I met my grandparents. The Smiths was indeed magnificent, even more grandeur than the mansion of the town's richest family. I followed my mother, a young child, feeling a bit awkward in such a posh environment. Grandma held a teacup, repeatedly tapping the lid against the cup, disdainfully glancing at us. People from humble backgrounds can't handle high society. My father was a nobleman, with a promising future ahead. But for my mother, he willingly gave up his inheritance rights and followed my mother back to her hometown. A not-so-developed town. Grandpa and Grandma didn't like my mother. They thought that a lowly woman like her had snatched away their son whom they had carefully nurtured for over 20 years. So naturally, they didn't like me either. But no matter what, I am of the Smiths' bloodline, a fact that can't be changed. Even though they didn't like us, Grandpa and Grandma still accepted me. Acceptance doesn't mean kindness. They would make me stand in the yard at noon when the sun was scorching. Just because I dropped a grain of rice during lunch, or accidentally made a sound when the spoon touched the bowl while drinking soup. They would lock me in a small house, making me reflect on an empty stomach. Stella was like a little angel. She suddenly appeared at the Smiths, pulling my hand and acting cute in front of Grandpa. "Grandpa, I want this little friend to play with me, is it okay?" Who could refuse such a soft and sweet girl? That was the first time I had seen such a kind expression on Grandpa's face. She led me to a shady spot, released my hand, and smiled brightly at me. "My name is Stella, what's your name?" I lowered my head, feeling shy. "Ken." She tilted her head, leaned towards me, and blinked her big eyes. "Ken, you're really handsome." I didn't stay long at the Smiths, as I was taken back by my parents for breaking a precious vase of Grandpa's. The vase had been broken by a servant, but she couldn't afford to compensate, so she blamed me instead. I explained, but no one believed me. After that, I rarely went back to the Smiths and never saw her again. Just sometimes, I would remember a girl who pulled me from the scorching sun to the shade. Later, I heard she got married, to Shawn. I didn't feel much, we were too young when we met, far from the age for love to develop. I saw her again after more than a decade. By then, I had become successful in my own business, and even Grandpa, who had always looked down on me, had to admit that I might be more outstanding than he had imagined. He called me back to discuss taking over the company. In this multi-generational prestigious family, they value legitimate children and capabilities more. To be honest, I was disdainful. But for my mother's sake, I agreed. My mother, she's naive, she dreams of gaining acceptance from my grandparents leaving. I saw her standing by the roadside. I couldn't remember her childhood appearance anymore, but luckily, Grandpa had shown me photos of all 3 generations in the family circle. Almost by accident, I rolled down the car window and asked her if she wanted to get in. Without hesitation, she refused. It made sense since I was a total stranger to her now. She would have been silly to get in my car. It was unexpected to meet her at the club. Stella, the most elegant in high society, dressed like a captivating fairy. Maybe, this was her true self. Fiery yet captivating. She spotted me too, pointing with her graceful fingers. "He's the most handsome one, him." It seemed like she mistook me for a male model. I lowered my gaze, putting on an innocent and obedient look, and greeted her with a smile. It seemed interesting. Shawn was attracted by my words. I had someone contact him, saying his mistress was working at the club. From what I found out, he spoiled that girl a lot and wouldn't allow her to work in such a place. Sure enough, he showed up. I purposely left the room door slightly ajar and had someone guide him over. Shawn found us, angrier than I had imagined. Of course, what man wouldn't be furious seeing his wife betraying him in front of his eyes? I admit I'm not a good person, I just wanted to stir up trouble. But when Shawn tried to drag her away, a voice in my head kept shouting, "Get her back." Maybe I regretted leading Shawn here when she sat on me and kissed me recklessly. I stood in their way, but she shook her head at me. Right, they were the legal couple, and I was just a stranger. How could I talk about getting her back? She never belonged to me in the first place. I pulled up the surveillance footage and handed it to a news outlet. As for the truth behind the store vandalism, no one dared to speak up. That mistress, aside from likely being kept in the dark, even if she knew, how many people would believe her account? As expected, things blew up. Shawn compensated for all the losses, and along with the money, he had a message. He said, "One should know their place, don't crave what doesn't belong to you." I swept all the stationery on my desk to the floor. After venting, I couldn't help but admit that what he said was true. Saying I liked Stella, well, that might be a stretch. I just found her interesting. At least, that's what I believed before I saw her and Shawn in matching outfits. After the unpleasant end at the mall, I went back and smoked 2 packs of cigarettes. No matter how I thought about it, her outfit was just too striking. Since I couldn't stand their marital bliss, why not break them up? Didn't Shawn say she didn't belong to me? Then I'll make her mine. With that in mind, I asked Linda out. She wanted to move up in the world, wasn't it simple? Just 1 child would be enough. A married tycoon, cheating in marriage and getting the mistress pregnant by leveraging the power of public opinion, their marriage would surely end. Whether Linda, being a fool, could succeed in climbing the social ladder with a child, that would depend on her own abilities. They divorced. I encountered Shawn a few times at business banquets. He didn't seem to be doing well. Heard he was troubled by love. Linda didn't succeed in her quest for success with Shawn, as the child she bore wasn't his. Upon hearing this news, I simply smiled. Stella finished her trip in England and headed to Scotland. These past few months, I had been keeping tabs on her movements. I also knew that Shawn had gone to look for her. However, he seemed to have some self-awareness and didn't dare to disturb her. Get me a ticket for tomorrow to fly to Scotland. After all the time she has had to reflect, maybe she can start a new relationship. Standing by the window, looking at the distant blue sky and white clouds, I asked myself again, do I like Stella? The answer is, I do.